channel of JJ is requesting you to on to Joseph Camera. My test 1 2.
现在อยู่位置啫。Woody.
Sure, sure. Now this is the first thing. Let's yeah, yes. So some 4 minutes. Can I call the panelists in the morning session, opening session, to please take their chairs? Good morning, Bulavinaka, Namaste, and warm Pacific greetings to each and everyone present in this lecture theatre. I have the very pleasant task of being the master of ceremony and chair of the first and opening session of the 2016 Pacific Update. My name is Vijay Naidu, and I am Professor and Director of Development Studies in the School of Government Development International Affairs and Acting Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics here at USP. The chief guest, Honorable Mr. Ayaz Sayed Qayyum, Attorney General and Minister for Economy, Professor Rajesh Chandra, the Vice Chancellor and President of the University of the South Pacific, Her Excellency Ms. Margaret Toomey, Australian High Commissioner, Vice President Bambang Suntano, Asian Development Bank, Dean of Asian Development Bank Institute, representatives of Asian Development Bank, Professor Stephen Hose, and colleagues from Australian National University, scholars, policy makers, development practitioners, paper presenters, USP staff and students, ladies and gentlemen. I have two pleasant tasks this morning. Firstly, to warmly welcome you all to this opening session of the 2016 Pacific Update on Lodala campus at USP. The Pacific Update reminds me of the Pacific Way series of lectures that used to happen at USP in the 1970s and 1980s. Very seminal, very important in terms of policy making in the region. And my second very pleasant duty is to introduce 7 preeminent speakers in the morning session, beginning with the first 3 sitting in front of you. Being mindful of the time constraints, I will introduce all the speakers sequentially in terms of their presentation, and then I will sit quietly, which is one of my pastimes these days. Before I introduce them, I wish to make just 2 acknowledgements and a quick comment. First, I wish to acknowledge the indigenous stewards of the Suva Peninsula on which Lodala campus is located, and also to remind ourselves that this campus, the headquarters of the premier regional university, is a peace dividend, being formerly the base of the Royal New Zealand Air Force and subsequent partnerships in the region. The campus, of course, has been immensely transformed since the late 1960s, and especially under the leadership of the current Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajesh Chandra. Second, I acknowledge the organization and sponsorship of the Pacific Update by the Pacific Department of the Asian Development Bank in Manila, the Asian Development Bank Institute in Tokyo, Development Policy Center, Crawford School of Public Policy, Australian National University, Canberra, and the School of Economics, Faculty of Business and Economics, USP. Considerable amount of behind-the-scene efforts have taken place to bring this conference together and to make it a success, and we are at the take-off stage of what I hope will be a very successful conference. Please let us put our hands together to express our appreciation to this partnership and the efforts of their personnel. Now, my comment, I'm delighted that the theme of the 2016 Pacific Update Conference inclusive growth and enhanced resilience resonates very well with Samoa pathway and the seeds accelerated modalities of action and what is referred to as green economy and blue economy of sustain and as well as the alignment with the 2030 agenda of sustainable development goals. Implicit in the theme is the acceptance of the huge paradigm shift towards a genuine desire to commit future Pacific Island countries' development to the three bottom lines of sustainable development. So before I introduce the speakers, I wish to call our garlanders to garland our chief guests. And the Australian High Commissioner. So I begin by introducing our Vice Chancellor and President of the University of the South Pacific. Professor Rajesh Chandra has been Vice Chancellor of the University of the South Pacific since August 2008. He served as Foundation Vice Chancellor of the University of Fiji, and then he returned to USP, as I said, in 2008. Prior to going to the University of Fiji, he served USP for close to 30 years, where he held a number of senior positions, including Acting Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Pro-Vice Chancellor Academic, and Director of Planning and Development. Over these years, he also made significant contributions to the international academic community. He was chairman of the Executive Committee of the Commonwealth University Studies Abroad Consortium from 1999 to 2003, and he was also a member of the Technical Advisory Committee exploring the feasibility of a virtual university for Commonwealth small states. Within the Pacific region, Rajesh was part of the Pacific delegation to the World Summit on Sustainable Development, and he has attended the Pacific Island Leaders Meeting, the Commonwealth Education Ministers Meeting, the Forum Economic Ministers Meeting, the Pacific Islands Forum, and the General Meeting of the Association of Commonwealth Universities. Professor Chandra holds a PhD from the University of British Columbia. I go on to the Australian High Commissioner, Her Excellency Margaret Toomey. He's a senior career officer with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAD. Ms. Toomey has previously served as ambassador to the Russian Federation. Do you explain the Russian Federation's behavior these days? Ambassador to East Timor, Deputy Head of Mission of the Australian High Commission here in Suva previously, and also had previous postings to London and Belgrade. Ms. Toomey holds a Bachelor of Arts degree with honors Russian and French from the University of Melbourne. The Honorable Aya Sayed Qayyum, Attorney General and Minister for Economy, Fiji. Prior to his appointment as Cabinet Minister following the first ever truly democratic election in September 2014, Mr. Sayed Qayyum was the Fijian Attorney General and the Minister for Justice, Anti-Corruption, Public Enterprises, Communications, Civil Aviation, Tourism, Industry and Trade, and the Minister responsible for elections under the Bainimarama government. Mr. Sayed Qayyum attended Marist Brothers High School. He completed his Master's in Law degree at the University of Hong Kong. He holds a graduate diploma in legal practice from the University of Wollongong in Australia. He obtained his Bachelor of Laws degree at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia. He attended his Bachelor of Arts, majoring in Political Science and Development Studies, degree from the Australian National University in Canberra, Australia. He is admitted to the Supreme Court of New South Wales and to the higher courts of Australia and Fiji. Prior to his acceptance of the position of Attorney General, he was the General Manager, Group Legal and Compliance and Company Secretary of the Colonial Group of Companies in Fiji. Besides being a senior legal officer at the Director of Public Prosecutions Office in Suva, Mr. Syed Qayyum has also practiced law with Minter Ellison Lawyers in Sydney, Australia. I also was asked to introduce the speakers and panelists in the overview session, and I'll do so now. Ms. Emma Bebe, Director, Asian Development Bank. Emma is Director of Urban, Social Development and Public Management Division in the Pacific Department of Asian Development Bank. Previously, she was Principal Economist in the Pacific Department, responsible for macroeconomic monitoring, research and regional programming for the Pacific. She also worked with ADB's Pacific Sub-Regional Office here in Suva. Their work involved economic analysis, country programming, and project administration. She joined ADB in 2005 following a period as economic advisor with the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat in Suva. And you may want to read the rest of her biography. And moving on, Bembang Susantono, Vice President for Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development, ADB. Mr. Bembang Susantono assumed the position of Vice President, Knowledge Management in July 2015. He is responsible for management of ADB Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department, and Department of External Relations. Before this, Mr. Susantono was Vice President of Indonesia's Ministry of Transportation and Deputy Minister of Infrastructure and Regional Development. He has extensive experience providing policy advice to government, private sector, organizations and international institutions. Moving on to Mr. Barry Whiteside, Governor of Reserve Bank of Fiji. Mr. Whiteside was appointed the Governor of the Reserve Bank of Fiji in May 2011. He was appointed for another 3 years term on 28th May 2015. Mr. Whiteside was educated at Suva Grammar School and went on to obtain a Bachelor of Degrees in Economics and Administration from the University of the South Pacific. He was the recipient of USP Awards for Studies in Administration. Later, as a Commonwealth Lead Scholar, he completed a Masters of Arts degree in Economics from Simon Fraser University, Canada. Governor Whiteside is a career central banker and has been with the Reserve Bank of Fiji since 1977. Edimon Jingting, Director, ADB. Edimon Jingting is currently Director of Economic Analysis and Operational Support Division at the Economic Research and Regional Cooperation Department of ADB. Prior to joining ADB in 2007, he had extensive international experience, including working as an economist at the International Monetary Fund, advisor at the Indonesian Parliament Research economist at the Productivity Commission Australia, research and lecturer at University of Indonesia, postdoctoral fellow at Monash University, and research economist at Gadjah Mada University. Mr. Jingting received his PhD in economics from Monash University. Ladies and gentlemen, shall we all welcome them very warmly? So it's over to you, Vice Chancellor, to give the welcoming address. And as I said, the other speakers just follow sequence after Professor Chan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Chief guest, Attorney General and Minister for Economy, Public Enterprises, Civil Service and Communications, Honorable Ayaz Sayed Qayyum, and I've said on previous occasions, he is the minister with the most responsibility in the Fijian government. The Australian High Commissioner, Her Excellency Margaret Twomey, Excellencies and members of the Diplomatic Corps, the Pro-Chancellor and Chair of USP Council, Mr. Winston Thompson, Vice President of Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development, Asian Development Bank, Mr. Bambang Susantono, the Dean of the Asian Development Bank Institute, Dr. Naoki Yoshino, members of the ADB team, and there's a fairly good number of people from ADB here, the Director, Development Policy Center, Australian National University, Professor Stephen Howes, and I similarly acknowledge his team here, members of Council, Senate, and their committees, the Acting Dean of the Faculty of Business and Economics, Professor Naidu, members of the senior management of USP, distinguished speakers, invited guests, colleagues from the Fiji National University and the University of Fiji, staff and students of USP, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the University of the South Pacific and on behalf of the organizing committee, I extend a very warm welcome to all of you to the 2016 Pacific Update Conference, about which Professor Naidu has spoken. And as you know, this is jointly hosted by the University of the South Pacific, the Asian Development Bank, the Asian Development Bank Institute, and the Australian National University's Development Policy Center. And in many ways, this sets the tone for the kinds of partnerships that will serve our region well. And I welcome that partnership very much. I extend a very special welcome to our chief guest, Honorable Sayed Qayyum, because we know, Honorable Minister, how busy you are and how difficult it is to get to be the chief guest at these functions. So we appreciate your acceptance to be with us and to open the very important development dialogue, perhaps the most important development dialogue on the Pacific. And the Honorable Minister told me earlier on that he'll stay on for the sessions until tea. So we welcome that very much, and thank you, Honorable Minister. So the value of this update conference is that it gathers policymakers, researchers, academics, development practitioners from the Pacific, but also brings other people from around the globe who will share their research and policy experiences, so that all of these, if we do it well, can help the Pacific governments and people and the development partners in finding sustainable solutions to their main development problems. In order for us to improve our development outcomes, we must take full advantage of the global opportunities and deal effectively with the current and future threats to our region coming from the same global community. And we need a combination of national, regional, and international perspectives and benchmarks. In a way, this update encourages all of that. And how well we, or what impact this update will have, will depend on all of the people involved in this update today. The theme Professor Naidu has already talked about is inclusive growth for enhanced resilience. And there are sessions on a whole range of things from economics, finance, governance, regionalism, information and communication technologies, environment, climate change. In fact, it's a very interesting range of topics. And the themes are especially important for the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that we have for the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. I would like to express the university's appreciation to the key partners who continue to enable us to hold this very important update and dialogue. And this, of course, is ANU, the ADB, and the ADBI. The university enjoys a very cordial and productive relationship with the ADB, and we are trying to strengthen that further. The strength of this relationship is exemplified by the visit that was made by the president of ADB last year to USP, Mr. Takechio Nakoa, to this campus, and in this very room where he gave a lecture and it was streamed worldwide. With the ANU, we have a very strong relationship, and ANU, of course, has a long history of being involved in the Pacific. I recently discussed the nature of the relationship between ANU and USP with the new Vice Chancellor, and we both agreed that we can bring new energy and innovation in the way we relate to each other, so that relationship recognizes the centrality of the University of the South Pacific, the other regional universities and Pacific institutions in the development of our member countries. We have always recognized that one of the roles of USP is to be an umbrella organization where we can get people to discuss and to dialogue, to link teaching and research and policy together. And we will continue to support this kind of activity, and we want to indicate that we are open to various partnerships that support the development of Pacific countries. We are, of course, at crossroads in the Pacific. The new framework for Pacific regionalism defines, in a way, a change in the manner in which the Pacific Island leaders wish to define their future, and in many ways it shifts the manner in which they wish the development to occur. And this calls for much greater sense of ownership and responsibility on the part of Pacific Island governments in their own development. Greater responsibility for Pacific governments and people to think more about their development and their solutions. Greater recognition and understanding, greater recognition and understanding from our development partners of the importance to give time and space and opportunity for the Pacific governments and people and institutions to think more about what matters to them and to come up with solutions that properly reflect the vision and ambitions of the Pacific countries, and solutions that are deeply rooted in the reality and the experiences of the Pacific. Recently, our Pro-Chancellor, Mr. Thompson, launched a new book on the new Pacific diplomacy, which indicates a trend in which what used to be a fairly closed Pacific is now opened up very significantly to the rest of the world. where our countries are wishing to explore tremendous opportunities that exist around the world. If our countries can do this, and also at the same time keep the other reality uppermost, that our individual and collective collective success depends on working together in the Pacific as well as working together with others. So regional cooperation and integration is going to be a defining feature of our success. In order for the region to harness these opportunities and to think more clearly as to what it wants, to deal with them more confidently and beneficially, then I want to argue that we need to focus significantly on the capability of our institutions and people, of our public service, etc. The most important measure of our success will be the quality of our people, as some governments are recognizing. It will depend on the innovation in our society, the agility of our response, and the competitiveness of our society. Because we all learn that the world is a very unforgiving place, and nobody is going to sustain anybody in the Pacific without significant cost to those societies. This, I think, calls for much greater discussion around education than we see in development forums, because education is the foundation, and particularly tertiary education, which actually gives the people with the intellect and the thinking and the agility and research and development that defines the ability of a country to carve out a competitive niche. In summary, we need to think much more about the nature of research and development and the creation of knowledge society in the Pacific. Just as important as this education is, so is political cohesion and the creation of a strong sense of nationhood. And I bring this up because as we explore multiple areas, it's very easy to forget that the most important element of how we will succeed is if we have this strong sense of nationhood, a shared vision, etc. We also know that conferences of this kind take a lot of financial and human resources. And our presence here today and the money we have spent has opportunity costs because we could be doing other things. It is vital, therefore, that the benefits of the presentations and the benefits of a dialogue like this goes out to the rest of the population. We are therefore streaming the presentations live so that other people in the Pacific and other people around the world can benefit from that. The media will be very active in disseminating the findings. All of the papers will go on the web. And I hope very much that all of this will mean that this dialogue has real impact on the people that the money and the time is spent for. We will have an evaluation of the conference, and I wish to encourage all of you to be honest in your assessment so that the next time this update is held, it can actually address any of your feedback. With these words, ladies and gentlemen, I wish all of you and all of us the very best in our deliberations for the next 2 days. And as I said, I always say this at conferences, And I hope that that will lead to a demonstrable, significant impact on the development outcomes and will promote resilience and inclusiveness in the widest sense of the two words. Vinaka Vakalebu, Shukriya, and thank you.
Good morning, the Honourable Attorney General, Ayaz Syed Qayyum, Vice Chancellor of USP, Rajesh Chandra, and all the distinguished USP team here. Our colleagues from the Reserve Bank, Vice President of the ADB, Susantano, Dean of the ADB Institute, Dr. Yoshino, and the ADB team. Distinguished participants from all around the region, including the Cook Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, Kiribati, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Republic of Marshall Islands, Timor-Leste, Tonga, Tuvalu, Vanuatu, and of course from our host country Fiji and my own country Australia, and in particular my ANU colleagues. Good morning, and thank you very, very much for the invitation to give these opening remarks, albeit at this rather early hour of the day, or an early hour for academia as I remember it as a student of Melbourne University. I want to begin by thanking the Asia Development Bank, the ADB Institute and the ANU's Development Policy Centre for their support for this conference, and of course the University of the South Pacific for hosting us today. And thanks to you, Vice Chancellor. Where have you gone? Oh, there you are. Thank you very much for your very salient observations about education and the very serious matter about the development of institutional capability. Policy dialogue is its most fruitful when it brings together different schools of thought, and I think it looks like we've got that today with an impressive array of participants. Over the next 2 days, we have a chance to share knowledge and witness robust debate on new research and methodologies. And I'm very pleased, this is the ultimate aim of being able to generate more effective public policy. I'm really pleased that this year's theme is inclusive growth and enhanced resilience. This is a useful headline to describe what we need to drive positive economic change in the Pacific. From Australia's perspective, the agenda is particularly pertinent. It includes many of the key issues Pacific governments are grappling with at the moment, many of which are also pillars of Australia's partnership with the region. Issues such as fisheries, labour mobility and climate change. In the Pacific, inclusive growth and enhanced resilience go hand in hand. Together, they're critical to achieving prosperity in this region. There is no one definition, of course, for inclusive growth. We know that growth is inclusive if it reaches large parts of a country's labour force. It is growth that takes place in sectors where poor people work and where poor people live. And it uses methods of production that poor people possess. The purpose of Australia's aid program is to continue to contribute to sustainable economic growth and poverty reduction. We consider inclusive growth to be critical to reducing poverty. There is strong evidence that economic growth is good for the poor on average, but averages can mask slower rates of poverty, slower rates of poverty reduction among particular groups, such as subsistent farmers or others at the bottom of the income distribution. They can also distract us from focusing on those who, for various reasons, do not or cannot participate in economic activity that can raise their incomes. These groups may not have the ability to respond to the opportunities that economic growth presents. Gender, violence, geographic isolation and disability are all potential barriers to economic participation. You will also be aware of the challenge in the Pacific, that the challenge in the Pacific is as much around vulnerability as it is around poverty. The geography, the lack of economic diversity and dependence on certain imports means that economic shocks are common. A household's poverty status can change with one cyclone. An inclusive growth approach for the Pacific therefore also needs to focus on building resilience at the household level right through to the country level. And as I said, the two are intertwined. So what is Australia doing to support inclusive growth and enhanced resilience in the Pacific? Well, we're reducing barriers to economic participation to ensure that everyone can benefit from the growth in the economy. For example, by investing in women's economic empowerment as well as disability inclusive development. I know something that the Attorney General is particularly focused on at the moment. We all know that people can also be excluded from participation due to conflict and violence, and that's another reason we are dedicated to ending violence against women in the region. Again, a big focus of the Fiji government. We're investing heavily in climate change adaptation in the Pacific with an aim to reduce the impact of climate shocks at the household, community and the country level. And we are working closely with the private sector to improve financial inclusion, including through bilateral programs, but in particular through a major regional initiative, the Financial Inclusion for the Pacific program. At the macro level, making the most of trade opportunities, building strong and capable labour forces and encouraging investment are critical. Through PACER Plus and our ambitious Aid for Trade agenda, we're working to support regional connectivity, address infrastructure gaps and improve access to international goods and labour markets. Likewise, good budgetary management, building financial buffers for shocks and exploring options in relation to insurance all play important roles. As such, our development assistance will continue to target improvements to economic governance and the business of the environment. As people with an intense interest in the development and the well-being of this region, and as aid practitioners, we must be constantly incorporating new thinking into the work that we do. Drawing on international experience and bringing together people and ideas in the Pacific context is an important way of doing this, and it's why we're here today. I'm sure that this specific update will provide an important source of fresh ideas and perspectives to meet the development challenges of our region. With that, I wish you good luck, stimulating debate, free and frank exchanges, as we diplomats like to call them, and I hope some enjoyment and some fabulous networking at all. Thank you very much. Vinaka Vakalevo, Dhanyavad Shukriya.
Bulvanakana, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You'll have to excuse me. I shouldn't be here. I should be in bed, actually. But the Vice President, the Vice Chancellor, of course, Australian New Zealand High Commissioners, the Pro-Chancellor, USP, the Governor of the Reserve Bank, Permanent Secretary of Finance, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me much pleasure to be here. The wonderful thing about having two esteemed speakers before you don't actually have to say much, because they've actually said it all for you. But it gives me much pleasure to be here at the opening, as I would like to essentially highlight what the Vice Chancellor has mentioned, and that obviously is some of the challenges that's faced by the Pacific Island countries. Inclusive growth and enhanced resilience, obviously, can have a number of connotations and indeed meanings and applications. It's not just primarily for the economy, but as highlighted by the High Commissioner, it does address issues or needs to address issues such as the actual social methods within society. As I said, if you take from purely economic, commercial perspective, tourism, of course, is very big in the Pacific. Indeed, it contributes about 35% towards our GDP in Fiji. Majority of the people who work in the tourism sector are women. People who clean after you, people who wait on you, people who clean your bathrooms, your bedrooms, sweep around the place. They are women. If they are being bashed up the night before at home, what do you think their levels of productivity would be the next day? What do you think would be the rate of absenteeism? Our garment industry, of course, plummeted from about 20,000 workers to about 3,000 workers. Today it's grown to about 7,000 workers because Fiji is able to remodel itself as a garment manufacturing center, if you like, for specialized or doing low volume but high end. So we've got about 7,000, 8,000 workers. Majority of them, 95% of them are women. So it is everybody's responsibility to ensure that we bring such matters into the public domain. They should not be captured or only relegated to the private domain, and indeed it's not something that should only be talked about by, women's organizations. It is everybody's business. The Pacific, of course, faces a number of opportunities but also challenges at the same time. We do not, for example, have the economies of scale within our own countries. We do not have economies of scale surrounding us. And as I said at the International Forum recently, in the Southern Pacific we have a population base of about 10 million people, of which nearly 8 million comes from Papua New Guinea. The balance of the 2 million is shared by 12 or 13 other countries. So your ability to attract private sector investment, your ability to have a lot more competition within your market, your ability to, for example, restructure your state-owned enterprises does become limited because of the fact that you do not necessarily have the economies of scale, because your ability to attract private sector participation again is limited because of the fact that many companies won't look at you because you don't necessarily have the volume. So it is very, very important, therefore, that the Pacific Island countries actually do collaborate with each other. And this is why such a forum is very critical, because it does bring the Pacific Island countries together. It does provide the opportunity to look at many of the challenges that actually are cross-cutting within the Pacific Island countries. And hopefully the donor countries, the various development partners, funding agencies are able to also take a leaf or actually gain some knowledge from that. And we of course need to learn from what is happening within the wider sort of context outside the Pacific. Just to give you an example, we have in Fiji we have something like about 105% more SIM cards than the actual population base for for mobile phones. Because of course some people, as you know, have more than 2 mobile phones. So you have more SIM cards than actual people in Fiji. But that does not necessarily mean that everybody is connected in Fiji. It does not necessarily mean that we don't have, black spots or brownouts. We have, of course, at the same time, a very sort of substantial gap in the connectivity between the Pacific Island countries. We are very lucky at the moment. For example, the Samoans are now building a cable or laying a cable from Samoa to come to Watuanga here to connect to the Southern Cross Cable. And Fiji, of course, is very lucky to have the Southern Cross Cable land in Fiji. So the Samoans are building a cable that will pass between Taveuni and and Vanuatu. That will then give us the opportunity to build a pipe out of it and land it in Savu-Savu, a cost of about $6 to $7 million to get the people of Vanuatu connected. We talk about sort of the challenges of rural-urban drift. We talk about huge-scale migration from Vanuatu, people living in squatter areas in the Suvanosori corridor. And many of the reasons why they do come to these places, of course, apart from things like land leases not being renewed, is also the availability and accessibility to modern-day services. So the challenge, of course, for Pacific Island countries is to be able to, connect the people within. And I think that's part and parcel of the inclusive growth. Because if you do not have inclusive growth, as the High Commissioner also mentioned, that you actually continue to marginalize people. And this is why, we have decided also recently at the World Bank gathering in Washington to look at the measures of inequality within society. And inequality, or your measurement of how well you're doing, is not simply measured by your growth rates per se, but it must actually be measured by inequalities that exist within society itself. And I'm happy to say that Fiji, at least in this context, the inequality levels have dropped quite significantly compared to what it was about 10 to 12 years ago. So for Pacific Island countries, I think, as far as development partners are also concerned, is that I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to collaborate. I remember about 4 or 5 years ago, probably slightly more than that, we had the Solomon Islands minister, and we had meetings with him in Suva, and they talked about some anti-competitive behavior that existed in Honiara. They did not necessarily have the skills and the resources to set up a separate commerce commission. So we sent across some people from the Commerce Commission in Fiji to help them, at least whether put in place some measurements that they can monitor through the Ministry of Commerce. But I think there's a lot of opportunities within the Pacific for Pacific Island countries to collaborate. Some of us, of course, have advantages over other countries, and they may have other advantages in specific other areas that we may not necessarily have. So the idea is, and also with the academics here, with the various people who may have done research and all the other stakeholders, it is also very important for the government officials who are here to be able to tap into your knowledge base for governments to make good decisions. Because I think the ability to make decisions for government and the right decisions is greatly enhanced once we have perhaps a plethora of ideas that we can actually choose from and see what is most suitable for us. I know we're supposed to finish the session at 9:10. We've already gone past that by 10 minutes. But just very quickly, I think also the other point that I'd like to highlight is there's a very critical need to capacity build within the Pacific. We have recently, and much to our delight, we have been talking a lot about in the international fora about the ability to upscale our staff, the government officials in the Pacific, not just in Fiji, but in the Pacific widely. For example, to be able to access climate finance. It's called climate finance. Some people call it green climate fund finance. But it is a bureaucratic jungle. It is a bureaucratic nightmare to be able to access these funds. You can access some of these funds through grants. You can access some of these funds through soft loans. But there's a number of permutations through which you can actually put together proposals. But there's very little knowledge about it. So we've gone into partnership with UNESCO, and beginning from next month, we are holding some informal sessions and bringing in Pacific Island officials to know about climate finance. The reality is that we are the cold face of climate change, notwithstanding the fact that our carbon footprint is almost negligible. But the fact of the matter is that we are the cold face of climate change, and we need to build resilience not just at the economic level, but also physical resilience. But in order to do that, you need to be able to access the funds. And in order to do that, you need to know how to navigate through this maze of accessing funds. So it's this capacity building that is very, very critical, and we're trying to build that capacity building, within the Pacific region. We've also overall, just to give you an example, I think what is really critically important is recently we were at a gathering in Singapore, well, probably not recently, but before Cyclone Winston, where the Singaporean government has, on a biennial basis, held meetings of civil aviation ministers meetings. And ICAO now has decided to jump into the area of carbon emissions. So rather than looking at the overall carbon footprint of a country, they're actually looking at the carbon footprint of the civil aviation industry per country, which means all of a sudden Fiji's carbon footprint is greater than Australia's. Because the reality is that the Pacific Island countries cannot actually drive to each other's country. We actually have to invariably fly. So the carbon footprint for the civil aviation industry becomes greatly enhanced. So this week on Thursday, as it transpired from the meeting in Singapore, we are holding a meeting of civil aviation ministers in Nadi to be able to have a joint position to the ICAO meeting in Montreal in September, to say that this methodology of aggregating your carbon footprint is completely wrong, because you need to be able to look at the overall carbon footprint of a country. So there are specific needs of the Pacific Islanders. They need to actually fly more than perhaps a French person who can drive across to Switzerland or wherever they can drive to, or go by train, whereas we can't. So these are some of the issues that I hope that you're able to discuss too, in respect of some of the specific challenges vis-a-vis international standards and norms that are being set that could actually put us out of kilter. And I think that is very, very critical to also discuss. Similarly, our ability to connect to various other, for example, restructural reforms that takes place in state-owned enterprises, I think is very critical to be able to contextualize it in the Pacific context. So, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all a very successful workshop, conference, and I'd like to thank once again ADB for their participation and collaboration with the USP. Of course, the Australian government through the ANU has participated in this previously, and I'd like to thank them for that. And I wish you all a very good morning. Vinaka, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you'll agree with me that the opening session went very well, with the speakers making very pertinent statements about the theme of the conference. Can I ask you to give them another round of applause, please? So I call upon Ms. Emma Debe to make a presentation.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for getting up so early this morning. I felt it was early because I'm 4 hours behind the times already, having arrived yesterday, to join us for this next couple of days to talk about development issues in the Pacific at the Pacific Update Conference. ADB is really pleased to work with our partners, USP, the ADB Institute, and the ANU, to bring everyone together to talk about critical issues in the Pacific. When you look at the program, there's a lot of topics covered, and you sort of wonder, how do these all fit together? I think some of our opening speakers drew the links between topics, but I wanted to help set the scene through talking a bit about the regional economic overview for the Pacific. We've just released last week the latest of our half-yearly updates of Pacific Economic Monitor. It provides country economic updates as well as discussion of policy and thematic issues. So most of the information I will draw from this, but there's some copies outside and you can certainly find it on our website. To think about the Pacific, I think we first have to think about what are some of the issues globally going on that impact on the Pacific. The preceding speakers spoke about the importance of trade, labour mobility. All of those issues are very much impacted by how our neighbours' economies are faring. And I think some of the global news has been a bit scary even for non-economists recently. So we have to look at the global economic performance, the economic performance of our major trade partners. For the Pacific, why this is particularly important are commodity prices. Many of the larger Pacific countries are big commodity exporters, you know, PNG, Timor in particular. But the smaller countries are highly dependent on commodity imports. So there's gains and losses in shifts in commodity prices for the Pacific. And that's particularly important to understand what resources governments in the Pacific have to work with when they're looking at where to spend funds on. And tourism trends are also very important for many Pacific countries like Fiji, Cook Islands, Palau, that are heavily dependent on tourism. When a domestic economy is not performing well, people tend to stay at home rather than travel abroad. So when neighbouring economies are not performing well, the tourism industry needs to think about how to prepare for the impacts. So what are the international trends? I think what we've seen recently is global growth has been stalling. Recent years, it has certainly been stepping downwards. We see situations of tight credit, exchange rate volatility. I think the focus recently has been on the pound, but in this region within recent years, we've looked at shifts in the Australian dollar, US dollar, having a big impact for many of the countries. And certainly Brexit is something everyone is talking about. EU is a big player in this region. What does this mean for Europe? What does it mean for the Pacific? So these are some of the interesting topics we might be thinking about as background to the next couple of days. Looking at the world trends, you'd see in past years the Pacific has actually performed very, very well compared to the world, but that's, as someone else said, averages hide a lot of things, and that was really driven by the very strong performance of the PNG economy. And so now, with the PNG economy weakening, we see expectations of Pacific performance dropping rather significantly at a time when the world economy has also been going slowly, although we expect some pickup in 2017. Commodity prices. Now we've seen a dramatic fall in commodity prices in recent times. The expectation is that there will be some uptrend in this, but prices are still low. And I think you can see from these exports, the crude oil is an important import in the Pacific, an export for Timor to a large extent. But things like logs, coconut oil, low prices in these really do affect the Pacific. And they affect people in rural areas in particular who rely on some of these industries for their livelihood. I think the other external factor that really affects the Pacific is the weather and natural disasters. And what we've seen in recent years is an unfortunate series of extremely violent events, Category 5 cyclones. It's not very common, but we've seen 2 of them in the Pacific in the just over the last year. And in the North Pacific, FSM experienced Cyclone Mosak, which was certainly an unusual event in the North Pacific. So while some countries, largely in the south, have been experiencing heavy rains and cyclones, in the north, across PNG, Solomons, the compact countries, the El Nino experience has meant droughts for them. And that's been a severe impact on government, having to provide water, food, etc. for affected populations. In fact, there's around about 4.1 million people at severe risk of these natural disasters in the Pacific as a UN estimate. And so you can ask the question, are these events the new norm? And I think one of our sessions will focus in, or a couple of sessions will focus in on that topic. Just to focus in on Winston, and I probably don't need to tell an audience in Fiji the severe impact economically, socially, to the production of the country. The huge cost that this places in terms of reconstruction and rehabilitation is something that affects an economy for several years afterwards. I think in Samoa after the tsunami, we saw a good 3 or 4 years to get back to a stronger pre-tsunami economic position. And certainly the growth forecasts for Fiji have been pulled downwards in response to that event. And the particular impacts on the different sectors. And the total numbers are extremely significant in terms of GDP. So what about the Pacific's economic performance, and how have these world events touched on the Pacific's economic performance? Well, if you had asked me a couple of years back, we'd seen extremely strong performance by the resource exporters. Timor PNG was growing faster than China, which is not usual for many Pacific countries. But the commodity prices have really impacted these countries, and so we're now seeing the larger Pacific countries' performance declining substantially. But perhaps the most interesting thing here is that the smaller Pacific countries, when we leave out Timor, PNG, Fiji and Solomons, so the biggest 4 out of it, and it's really PNG and Timor's growth that affects that, we're seeing good solid growth in the smaller Pacific countries, and it really is a rising trend over time, which I think is a very positive thing, because there has been talk in economic circles about can small islands be sustainable, and what is a reasonable rate of growth to expect. So I think we're seeing that countries have been lifting performance and have had good solid growth. So to look in a bit more detail at the region, I'm not going to focus in on individual countries. You can read our Pacific Economic Monitor for that. But I wanted to focus on the resource-rich countries, some of the challenges they're facing in the face of the declining commodity export earnings, and how that flows through to falling revenues for government. Because although there's private sectors in these countries, they tend to be isolated within an industry and not necessarily flow through well to the rest of the economy. So it's government expenditure that's really important for the standards of living of the general population, etc. So short-term response in these countries, we've seen the need to prioritise reduced expenditure. How can investment programs be better supported by development partners rather than necessarily out of government's own expenditures? Where these are available, for example, in the case of Timor, there's a sovereign wealth fund that they can draw on to fill the gaps in revenue. And this is commonly something used in the smaller Pacific countries, but it's serving Timor very well at the moment. Looking through to medium-term responses, the needs to improve efficiencies in budget allocations and implementation, and of course economic diversification, which is much easily said than done. Even the larger countries need to look at how to bring in the most vulnerable groups into the formal economy, earn jobs, have jobs with wages that they can pay the increasing things that are regarded as essentials in modern life. Pay for their mobile phones, pay for their children to go to school, pay for transport. All of these things require people to have some form of income stream. If we go to the smaller countries in the Pacific, what we see as growth drivers, the savings that are being made through lowered fuel costs and fuel import costs, which flows through to lowered transport costs and food import costs. So there's some positive benefits of low commodity price for the smaller import-dependent islands. What we've also seen is while tourism growth might be slow in coming out of US or Europe, the Pacific is placed so that the Australia, New Zealand, and increasingly the Asian markets are important. And there the growth has been slightly stronger than the rest of the world growth. Particularly the New Zealand tourism market and the rapid growth there has been important to the South Pacific region. And in some countries, construction has been an important driver of growth. Take Kiribati, for example, where there's work on water, roads, power, all going on simultaneously. It's really provided a kick-start to growth in the country. What do these smaller countries need to help drive growth? I'm arguing from an economic perspective, not an infrastructure bank perspective here, but certainly infrastructure investments. And that does include social infrastructure, water supply systems, good solid schools that are disaster resilient, health centres, etc. These are all things that help to drive growth in the economy. Certainly diversification, and we've got a session talking about niche markets, trade issues. I think that's increasingly important. How do we bring together all these small, medium enterprises, small coffee growers, etc., to be able to produce at a level and at a quality that really makes a difference in the economy? What can we learn from the Fiji water experience? How can we replicate that sort of thing elsewhere and in other products? And for the small islands, managing debt is very important. So making sure that you have the ability to access credit when you need it, making sure that it's spent on things that provide a good return. And in the public financial management area, I think that becomes a very critical issue for the smaller countries in particular. One last plug for the Pacific Economic Monitor. We've looked at fisheries, and fish are a big resource in the Pacific. We'll have a session on that too. But looking at how the returns from fisheries can be further increased. We've seen wonderful increases in returns in recent years, but is there scope for greater returns within a sustainable management system? So that's one last thing that this also be a session on. So thank you very much for that, and I hope that we use this opportunity to really talk through these issues, share ideas, share experiences, and come out with a few new ideas of things that we could be thinking about in our country or our development programs. So thank you.
Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Finance, Public Enterprise, Public Service and Communications, Mr. Ayaz Sayed Kayum, Governor Reserve Bank of Fiji, Governor Barry Whiteside, Australian High Commissioner, Ms. Margaret Tuomi, Vice Chancellor, Professor Rajesh Chandra, my colleague ADBI Dean, Naoyuki Yoshino, which is connected, I believe, with the video conference. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Bula Vinaka, welcome and good morning to all of you. I'm delighted to be here on my first trip to South Pacific and Fiji as Vice President of ADB. I extend our thanks and appreciations to the government of Fiji and our host today, the University of South Pacific, for the warm and gracious hospitality. My colleague Emma has already talked more on the broader Pacific context, so let me now talk more on the Fiji's context, because today we would like to launch 2 reports on Fiji. At the outset, I commend the government of Fiji for its reconstruction and rehabilitation efforts to restore normalcy in the aftermath of Tropical Cyclone Winston earlier this year. I understand that this was the first Category 5 storm to ever hit the country, which led to loss of 31% of GDP and affected more than 60% of the populations. Let me assure of the people and the government of Fiji that ADB continues to stand by Fiji in our hour of need, and as it has in the past in 2009 and 2012 following natural calamities. In further support, I'm pleased to inform you that the ADB Board of Directors approved an emergency loan to Fiji for $50 million on 23rd of June 2016. ADB and Fiji have fostered deep ties since the early days of Fiji's independence, and consistent with the priorities of successive governments, ADB engagement in Fiji has focused on promoting inclusive economic growth and poverty reductions. Strides have been made toward this goal through direct investment in transport, urban water and sanitation infrastructures, and improved public sector management. As of April 2016, 420 million in loans, 2 million in grants, and 32 million in technical assistance have been provided to Fiji. In addition to partnering with governments and development projects, ADB has made knowledge solutions as an integral part of its long-term mission of contributing to the development of its member countries. We in ADB has what we call the Finance Plus Plus approach, where this not only the financing that we are offering to our member countries, but the first plus is also the knowledge, and the second part is the leveraging or co-financings. And today, the 2 report that we would like to launch, we have what we call the country diagnostic study. This one is the Fiji Building Inclusive Institution for Sustained Growth. And the second one is the Fiji Employment Diagnostic Study, the Fiji Creating the Quality of Jobs, will be launched here. And for those of you who are interested to have this, it's already in the website, or we also have some small USB like this that we will put on the table so that you can grab this knowledge product. We launched today as part of our knowledge solutions of ADB that offers to further the development efforts in a country. The CDS, or the Country Diagnostic Study, seeks to identify critical constraints to sustain and inclusive growth. The EDS, the Employment Diagnostic Study, focuses on an important part of the economy, which is the labor market, with a view to encourage job creations and improving the quality of work, as being mentioned by our EG this morning. The creation of quality employment is crucial to a country's sustained and long-term development. It is also a key pillar for the ADB's inclusive growth framework. The CDS identifies 4 critical constraints to inclusive growth. First, regulatory requirement in which private businesses expect to operate, particularly those related to registering, starting, and operating a business. Second, investment gaps in transport and communication infrastructure. Third, institutional and policy constraints such as difficulties in accessing productive assets. And fourth, the lack of skilled labor force to meet the requirement of a modern, thriving economy. ADB is actively partnering with the government in these areas, and ADB's board approved a new country partnership strategy, we call it the CPS for 2014-2018, and this CPS provides the foundation for sustained and inclusive growth. Through this, we have been able to offer the government up to $350 million in concessional financing for over the next 5 years, as much as since Fiji joined ADB in 1970. In addition to informing ADB operation in Fiji, these reports will also serve as a tool for dialogue with wider development stakeholders on the multidimensional challenge in this country. In conclusion, once again, I would like to extend my thanks to all of you for your presence here today. Particularly, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to Honorable AG, to Governor Berry for their participations. Also, thanks to and congratulate the ADB and ILO team behind these 2 studies here in the reports. I hope these 2 studies will complement government's effort at moving the Fijian economy forward. Finally, let me also thanks to our partners, the ANU, Australian National University, the University of South Pacific, our ADBI, and ADB Pacific Regional Department for organizing this wonderful event, bringing together experts from around the Pacific and beyond. This is a prime example of knowledge sharing and development of regional knowledge network. With your permissions, allow me to hand over the 2 reports, the CDS, the Country Diagnostic Study, and the EDS, the Employment Diagnostic Study, to our AG for further review. Thank you. Vinaka Fakaleviu.
Honourable Minister, Excellencies and members of the Diplomatic Corps, Vice President of the ADB, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Bula vinaka and a very good morning to you all. According to the program, I've run out of time. Please bear with me. Give Vijay permission to shoot me down if I'm going too long, but I want to say a bit today. Ladies and gentlemen, in my brief, I have been asked to share with you our view of the state of the Fijian economy and opportunities going forward for us. The fact that we expect to register a positive growth this year, despite the devastating impact of tropical cyclones Winston and Zina, is a feat in itself. Our forecast of 2.4% compares with a pre-cyclone number of 3.5% and is, I feel, a product of the resilience of the Fijian people, the rapid response of the government and private sector in general, and of timely and appropriate policy responses from both domestic and international sources to ensure macroeconomic stability was maintained, while all the while being mindful of the needs of our people. We cannot escape the fact that there was also a sizable measure of providence for us, notwithstanding the lives actually lost and other great suffering, in that the track of Winston did not cut its way through the heart of our industrial and tourism sectors. Ladies and gentlemen, growth in the Fijian economy in the past 3 years has averaged 4.7%, supported by accommodative fiscal and monetary policies, a credit cycle upswing, improved investor and consumer confidence, and the re-engagement of development partners with our return to parliamentary democracy. 2015 was a year of records for us. We saw all-time high annual visitor arrivals, tourism earnings, remittance inflows, and foreign reserve holdings. Lower global oil prices have also helped keep inflation low, held our import bill in check, and consequently shored up Fiji's foreign reserves assets, apart from generating a growth dividend, especially in the key transport, tourism, and retail sectors. In short, the strong and broad-based economic growth momentum since 2013 yielded a relatively more solid and diversified Fijian economy by the beginning of the year. Fiji's growth in 2016 remains broad-based, outside of the sectors negatively impacted by TC Winston, which include agriculture, especially cane, sugar manufacturing, utilities such as electricity and water, and the forestry industry. In fact, the 6 leading growth sectors, with the exception of the financial sector, are expected to grow stronger in 2016 relative to our earlier expectations. The medium-term outlook for the Fiji economy is expected to remain positive. Notwithstanding any further adverse shocks, our current forecasts put growth at 3.6 for 2017 and 3.2 for 2018. Future growth is expected to result from ongoing rebuilding efforts, as well as the faster pace of government capital spending, strong tourist numbers, and good remittance inflows. Coming back to 2016, the transport sector has continued to lead growth for Fiji and is expected to perform better this year on account of the commencement of Fiji Airways flights to Singapore and San Francisco. Some sectors are benefiting from the impetus provided by rehabilitation efforts post-natural disasters. Strong consumption so far this year, supported by the $278 million Fiji National Provident Fund payout to members for post-TC Winston rehabilitation, the $88 million government help for homes assistance, robust remittance inflows, strong labor market conditions, and relatively cheaper credit confirm the anticipated buoyant wholesale and retail activity. The construction sector is also set to benefit from post-Winston reconstruction, in addition to government's planned infrastructure spending. Higher capital spending by government and projected record visitor arrivals underscore the envisaged solid contributions from the public sector and accommodation and food services category to economic growth for 2016. Ladies and gentlemen, it is important that we focus on some of our strengths and opportunities to see how we can further progress. From a sources of growth lens, and given the impact of TC Winston on crops, livestock, infrastructure, and livelihoods, the fact that Fiji is not solely reliant on 1 or 2 sectors underpins why we will still record positive growth this year. The same can be said when we move from the broad economy down to the individual sectors. For instance, the tourism industry, our major foreign exchange earner, has further diversified its growth base over recent years. The tourism industry has for years grown on the back of elevated demand from our 2 traditional short-haul source markets, Australia and New Zealand. More recently, despite the general appreciation of the Fiji dollar against the Aussie and Kiwi dollars, visitors from these 2 countries have continued to grow, indicative of the strength of the Fijian tourism product. Nevertheless, not resting on our laurels about the strength of our product and our 2 secure short-haul markets, Fiji's tourism sector duly recognized and responded to the opportunities present in tapping into the China and wider Asia market, and even further into the Americas. Fiji Airways introduced direct flights to Hong Kong in 2009, and also in April of this year to Singapore, which is a regional travel hub and provides further opportunities to other destinations in Asia, including India. Code-sharing arrangements for onward travel have already been sealed with Jetstar. Direct twice-weekly Nandi-San Francisco flights also commenced in June this year, adding to the daily Los Angeles flights. The airline's recent investment in 4 brand-new wide-body Airbus 330s has been key to growing and diversifying our tourism source markets. This is highlighted by the fast-growing Chinese visitor arrivals, which climbed to above 40,000 in 2015 and now comprise our 4th largest segment after Australia, New Zealand, and the USA. Latest data shows total visitor arrivals up by 5.8% in the first 5 months of this year. The tourism industry is also broadening its product base, as exemplified in Fiji's recent hosting of the Waikato Chiefs and Canterbury Crusaders rugby match. The benefit to the economy through resultant spending by both inward travelling and Fiji-based fans of these two Super Rugby franchises means that sports tourism must become a major part of what Fiji has to offer to travellers. Interestingly, the positive spin-offs created via this game being beamed into homes across Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and to Super Rugby followers across the world present additional tourism opportunities. Medical and aged care tourism is also an area of opportunity, given our highly competitive medical professionals and caregivers that continue to be recruited in advanced economies, and the added bonus of our naturally beautiful environment that would be therapeutic, especially for recovering patients. Niche tourism in Fiji today also includes the very successful conferences, weddings, adrenaline, and ecotourism markets. Time does not permit me further elaboration, but suffice to say the opportunities to broaden the base within the tourism sector are being taken. Ladies and gentlemen, I note from the conference program that there is a session on linking tourism and agricultural development. This is indeed an important strategy, as the agricultural sector still supports the livelihoods of most of our rural dwellers and can potentially contribute to meet the demands of the obviously vibrant and constantly changing tourism industry. More importantly, there also needs to be an appreciation of the local context in these strategies. Industry feedback reveals that some hotel procurement staff set unrealistic standards on the shape and size of certain fruit and vegetables without duly recognizing that our agricultural produce are amongst the sweetest, tastiest, and freshest in the world. Over time, close collaboration between all stakeholders is needed to overcome teething problems and ensure that our local farmers will indeed target to meet most, if not all, of our tourism industry's agricultural produce demand. Agriculture remains an important area of opportunity for the Fijian economy, and certain ventures into large-scale farming have proven quite successful. Nevertheless, improving the long-term leasing of land by addressing the relevant laws and policies guiding these areas are critical, as land tenure uncertainty continues to preclude sizable investment in agriculture, not to mention other sectors as well. Huge potential for increased production, value addition, and exports also lie in many other sectors, such as mineral water, garments, timber, mining, manufacturing, and SMEs. Exports of Fiji water, currently the #1 premium brand of water sold in the US, have risen over 60% over the last 5 years to around $200 million, and are set to grow further with the recent addition of a third production line. In addition, the company has also started a large fruit farm for mangoes and pawpaws in its own diversification efforts. The garment industry has already delved into niche products such as designer and sportswear, and is quickly realizing the benefits from these high-end products, raking in over $100 million annually. Value-added processing of our local timber, especially mahogany, and other indigenous hardwood remains untapped, constrained mainly by supply-side issues. Our mining sector also offers better benefits to the country, with substantial foreign investments geared to the extraction of new gold ore and iron sands resources, expected to come on stream in the medium term. As well, the MSME sector, which the Reserve Bank is closely involved with, holds enormous growth opportunities, not only in terms of increased consumption and investment activity for households and small businesses, but more specifically in making growth more inclusive towards our rural dwellers, women, youth, and the elderly, and especially the poor. I can think of virgin coconut oil, or VCO, and seaweed as just two examples of opportunities in this sector with unlimited markets if they could be better coordinated. I'm especially pleased to see the government placing further emphasis on developing its support for SMEs in Fiji. The recent announcement to establish an overarching SME council and also a coordinating authority is a huge step forward in putting in place a single coherent strategy towards the development and support for this key segment in our economy. Earlier, I alluded that a unique strength of the Fijian economy is obviously our own people. This has been most evident in the nation's recovery post-Winston. Despite the severe devastation of crops, livelihoods, and homes, life has returned to some normalcy in many parts of our country. For this, we need to recognize our individual efforts and support from the private and public sectors, including government, civil society organizations, key regional governments, and the international community, including the many Fijians living abroad. Homes and infrastructure are hopefully being built back better and should contribute to the national efforts around natural disaster resilience and climate change adaptation. Opportunities continue to arise in other areas. Inflows of workers' remittances have continued to surge in the first 5 months of this year, after reaching a record high of $492 million in 2015, a growth of 28%. Remittances are easily Fiji's second largest foreign exchange earner after tourism, and points to this great asset that we have, our own people. I understand that the Australian government is planning to uncap its seasonal worker program for agriculture and further open the tourism and aged care categories to seasonal workers from the Pacific region. In that regard, apart from continuing to strengthen labor mobility within the region, policymakers need to be strategizing on how to channel these inward financial flows to longer-term investment purposes, apart from just supporting short-term consumption activity. The Reserve Bank, through the National Financial Inclusion Task Force, is continuing to drive the national agenda of advancing financial inclusion in Fiji. This work includes promoting financial literacy and access to basic financial products and services, which will empower our people, raise living standards, and contribute to the growth in the economy. In fact, as part of the global drive to improve financial inclusion, Fiji will be hosting the Alliance for Financial Inclusion Global Policy Forum in Nadi in early September. The 5-day event will bring together policymakers, regulators, and leaders from over 90 countries worldwide to discuss issues relating to and mapping the way forward for financial inclusion. Ladies and gentlemen, as a crucial final point, policy certainty, relevance, and credibility play a vital role in our economy's success. Strong macroeconomic stability since 2013 has set a sound platform for the way forward. Additionally, government has accelerated reforms in key areas of the sugar industry, civil service, and infrastructure, while improving access to health and education, thus helping growth become more inclusive. These factors, along with the political stability we are enjoying, when added to an improvement in our credit ratings by Standard & Poor's and Moody's, have underpinned the rising confidence that has seen more domestic and foreign investment dollars flow into the economy. Improving the predictability and streamlining of government regulation is crucial to cementing inclusive economic growth and the gains made to potential growth. Transparent and consultative policy processes should strengthen policy certainty, lower the costs of doing business, enhance Fiji's business climate. Reducing excessive red tape and the multiple approvals from multiple authorities will go a long way in streamlining investment approval processes. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by reiterating that the Fijian economy is indeed set for its 7th consecutive year of growth this year, despite the devastating impact of the recent natural disasters. Fiji has continued to expand its sources of growth by diversifying its economy and broadening its key industries, particularly tourism. In a time where the world is more integrated and connected through trade, it pays not to put all eggs in one basket. Notably, our people will remain our greatest asset, and improving employment opportunities, strengthening human capital investment, and our collective productivity must form a key part of government's efforts at poverty reduction and inclusiveness. Macroeconomic stability, seen in the remarkable growth economic growth since 2013, low inflation, comfortable foreign reserves holdings, and a sound financial system has held the Fijian economy in good stead against relatively weaker regional and global economic outcomes. Future sustained and inclusive growth will also critically hinge on political stability and policy certainty, particularly as we aim to attract foreign direct investment and interest in niche and local businesses. Notwithstanding Fiji's strong and stable macroeconomic performance, we are susceptible to both domestic and external shocks, such as natural disasters, spikes in oil prices, a further global and China slowdown. And building policy buffers in good times is important to ensuring that we protect our economic fundamentals and growth trajectory. In addition, Fiji must continue to look at opportunities to do better in areas where we have abundant resources, like agriculture. This also highlights the need to continue with the structural reform agenda that the government has spearheaded, including improving Fiji's business climate to bolster the gains made in the recent past and to lift the domestic economy onto a higher and more inclusive growth path. On that note, let me thank you all for your kind attention and wish you all fruitful deliberations and hope that we can, together, come up with innovative ideas in fostering inclusive growth for enhanced resilience. Binaka Bakalibu.
AG, Governor Central Bank, Vice President and Vice Chancellor, I'm glad to be here. Thank you very much. I think my colleague Emma and Governor Berry already gave a good description on the short-term nature of the Pacific and the economy. In my presentations, I will focus a bit on the long term. And the presentation will be focusing on Fiji only. I think, let me start with these two reports. In ADB, we do this report to a number of countries. Basically, this is part of the tools for us to contribute to domestic policy debate on medium-term challenge facing each of our member countries. And also, we base our operations partly on the input of these consultations. The CDS focus on growth constraint, and the EDS focus on the inclusiveness of growth itself. Thank you very much for the opportunity to launch it here today. I think we were thinking of launching it earlier, but due to one or another constraint, we only be able to make it this month. The report itself was finished last year. Let me start with the context of Fiji. I think some of these important contexts are important in terms of explaining economic progress in Fiji over time. I think the first one, obviously, is Fiji is one of the larger Pacific countries. It is now in upper middle income, which would face new challenge of growth down the line. It is relatively high in terms of social development because of history and good quality of education. And also it's relatively rich in natural resources, but at the same time, it is also faced the challenge of small economy, and then it has been affected by a number of political turbulence, and at the same time, as witnessed by the recent Winston, I think over time, very often affected by the natural disaster. If you look at the number in Fiji in terms of economic growth, you see all of these things appear over time. I think whenever Fiji has a negative growth, or I think it's always because of either political turbulence or natural disaster. And also, that is the time when poverty is generally rising. And therefore, I think, again, these two factors are very important to address when it comes to economic resilience down the line. As Governor Berry said, I think recently economic growth has been rebounded, and actually momentum for higher and sustainable growth is already there. but the driver of that growth is actually investment. It is private investment. And this is again one of the feature of higher and upper middle income country. As it goes higher, I think as it goes to the higher ladder, it requires more and more of the private sector in terms of driving the source of growth. If you look at the time when investment is declining, it also coincides with the time when there's a political turbulence, right? And if you look at 1987, for example, when there is political turbulence, it's not always easy to revive the investment. And even if government at the same time, for example, here also bump up their investment, is not enough to recover investment. So the same is true here in 2006. This is the time when the private sector actually retreat and wait and see in terms of contributing to the economy. I think it is important to highlight that political cohesion, as highlighted by Vice Chancellor, is key in terms of driving economic growth down the line. In terms of key driver of growth, I think Fiji is a service sector. And that is, again, service is also, if you look at service worldwide, it is also very sensitive to political cohesion. And here, the service in Fiji has already been diversified. Now you can see a much larger role of financial sector, much larger role of the transport and logistic, and much larger role of other services. In this context, then, I think it's also key to sort of support a number of these driver over time, especially the banking sector and the transport sector. This is one of another way to look at the structure of Fijian economy is through its export. Export is generally more diversified compared to the economy of its size. If you look at the measure here, this is, we call it Espendal Index. The country below this line is actually the country where its export is somehow more diversified than the country above the line. Fiji is exactly on the line, showing that the country's export has actually been diversified over time. Obviously, it started with food, sugarcane, and so on early on, and later moved to garment because of the external policy environment, the closure of declining of garment in Australia, and also the openness of the trade quota in the US. But garment continue to be important, but now I think there is a new niche of export, water and skin product from Fiji. But if you look over time, I think Fiji is moving along the way, creating a new kind of product over time, adjusting to the change outside. Small economy like Fiji affected a lot by what happened outside, and then Fiji has been able to maneuver these changes with number of new product. I think this has been the strength of the Fiji. Obviously, as AG was saying, cost of transport here is very high. The only way for Fiji to compete is to focus on niche product, and those are the things that has driven the economy forward. Even in the tourism sector, actually, Fiji is known as a niche destination, and that is something that has been a good example of driving economic growth in this type of country. And you can see here, I think tourism has been the key sustenance to external economic positions. It's common for a small economy like Fiji to have a deficit balance of trade, because a lot of its, even manufacturing domestically, rely a lot on domestic, on import from outside as materials. Garment is an example. But at the same time, I think the deficit of trade balance is compensated well by the surplus and service sector, and also remittance has been highlighted later. So I think in this context, then I think as Governor Berry said, from external point of view, the Fijian economy is getting stronger because of this increased tourist revenue. Let me now move on to the inclusiveness of economic growth in Fiji. I think if you look at the poverty measured by the basic infrastructure, I think the poverty is low. I think it is single digit if you measure it using the 1.25 or $1.9 per capita PPP. Yeah, but if you use government measures, actually poverty is still very high. Around 1/3 of the population is still in poverty. There is the challenge for inclusiveness growth in Fiji, but at the same time, as growth pick up, as I think inclusiveness has also been affected if you measure from distribution point of view. In most regions in Fiji, I think the economic growth hasn't been more inclusive. In fact, income distribution has been worsened slightly as economy picking up. So that is then, the theme of the conference seems very relevant. I think it is very important for us now to not only to focus on growth, but also to focus on inclusiveness. In this context, I think the report identify 4 constraints, as mentioned earlier by Fifi Susantono. I think the first one is the remaining weakness in business climate. Second is the infrastructure, some gap in provision of infrastructure. And thirdly is on the access to productive assets, and also finally lack of the productive employment. Let me now quickly move on to the first challenge. I think as an outsider, I think I was puzzled by this number where, at the same time we saw investment is picking up very quickly over the last 5 years or so. But at the same time, measurement of business climate, such as ease of doing business, is not improving. I think what is explaining this, I think maybe perhaps, I think for the big business, business climate is not as important because they can maneuver the bureaucracy and so on. But for smaller business, this is more of an issue. I think this is true also in other countries. In conducive business environment is more harming for small business than the big business, I think. But at the same time, I think talking to private sector more recently, I think we note, I think the reform that has taken place, the overall the business environment has improved, and the government has undertaken a number of good initiatives on this front, and also we listed a number of things that can also be considered further down the line. The second constraint is infrastructure. As I said earlier, I think as a small economy, Fiji rely a lot on import and export to support its own growth. I think in that context, then efficient port, efficient transport infrastructure is key in terms of supporting growth down the line. At the same time, I think we also see Fiji becoming more urbanized. We can see some pressure here and there in terms of infrastructure. Those two, to make it sustainable, I think it's important to address some of the infrastructure related to urbanization. And finally, I think as the economy moving to the higher level, I think it is important to recognize that it's not always government who provide the infrastructure. The role of private sector can also be increased in terms of these provisions. And then next, I guess I think this is very common in a number of Pacific Island countries. Access to finance has been sort of constrained by the access to productive assets, particularly land. But also in this front, I guess a number of progress has been recorded here, including the land bank and recent decree on land use. I think, but at the same time, it's important to highlight that about half of the population still don't have access to finance, and I think the borrower is still being financed, but still being penalized by the higher cost of borrowing, especially in terms of ratio of loan to the collateral. I think on average in some of the country at the same level of development, I think loan to collateral ratio is around to 70%, but here on average still around 50%. And the last one, I guess, is the most important part in terms of inclusive growth. I think whenever Fiji experiences low economic growth, there's a tendency of workers moving back to informal sector, and a lot of those are actually in the agriculture sector, because agriculture has been the safety net for workers. As, you know, the same is true in many other countries. I think more recently, I think there are increasing number. I think still moving to informal sector. I think the challenge going forward, I guess, is to create more productive job for more educated Fijian, as a number of speakers have highlighted. At the end of the day, development is about people. In this context, we can highlight a few things here, although employment is still very low, but underemployment is high. Ratio of population working in informal sector is actually higher over time. And also at the same time, female participation. In a number of countries, increased female participation is actually one important element of increasing source of growth. My last presentation is about macro policy. I think Governor Berry have highlighted a number of important measures implemented by the government. But in terms of dealing with inclusive growth, let me highlight a number of points. I think there are a number of ways to support inclusive growth through fiscal. I think infrastructure is generally has been one way of doing it. Another, education is also important. I think recently government introduced a number of measures to improve spending on agriculture, on education, including free education up to 13 years or something. That is a good progress. But at the same time, as we have seen in the earlier chart, resilience against disaster is also very important. And therefore, providing a buffer for, fiscal buffer for disaster is also key in terms of sustaining economic growth down the line for Fiji. With that, thank you very much again. Hopefully the publication is useful. If you want to delve into it, I think it's available in the website. It's also, as Vivi said, we have some copy available here in the conference room. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, we have one remaining protocol that we needed to fulfill as part of our opening session. I'll ask Beng Susantano, the Vice President for Knowledge Management, ADB, to please come and sit in the front. So our colleague, Ms. Khushbu Rai, can garland him. This is part of the welcoming ceremony. And so we want to do that before we go for morning tea. So Khushbu, if you can come along and garland him. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings to a close the opening session. We have heard some very, very important commentary on development and future opportunities and prospects this morning, which hopefully will guide the deliberations in the other sessions over the next 2 days. I'd like to ask the chief guest, the Honorable Minister for Economic Affairs and Attorney General, to lead us to morning tea, and that concludes the morning session. Thank you very much.
excuse me. Morning tea and refreshments are available outside. There's a tent. If you go through that door, you turn right, refreshments are available. So, yes. And yeah, please come back as soon as possible so that we can proceed with our 10:30. Yeah, and then go to the parallel sessions.